Law school. It's an investment in your future. But like all investments, without the right advice, it can lead to disaster. That's where PreLawPro comes in. Whether you're exploring the law, navigating the admissions process, or need personalized career guidance, at PreLawPro, we've got your back. Don't gamble on your future. Invest in it. Get started today at PreLawPro.com.
How can I make myself more competitive?
How do I build my network?
I want my career to go to the next level, but I don't really know where to start.
I hate the job I am in. What else can I do?
I want to work in healthcare, but I don't want to be a doctor.
I need connections in a new industry. Where should I start?
Whether you're a college student trying to decide on a career path, a young professional trying to develop their career, or maybe you're in the mid to late stages of your own professional journey and you're looking for a new challenge, or maybe you're facing an unexpected job search. Whoever you are, wherever you are, welcome to the Professionists podcast. And together, let's find your fit. Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Professionists podcast. This week's guest is Andrew Bustamante, who's a former CIA human intelligence officer. And we're going to explore a bunch of really helpful tips and tricks on how to get the most out of your workplace situation and the relationships that you can build in that context. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Welcome, folks. This week we have a special guest who hails originally from Pennsylvania, graduated from the US Air Force Academy in Colorado, and is a former fencer, as in sword fighting as opposed to farming. He's a freediver, former Toastmaster. He has his MBA from UCF St. Petersburg in Florida. He's a former nuclear weapons officer with the US Air Force, a Peace Corps applicant, which will become relevant a little later on, and is a former clandestine operations officer with the CIA, where he spent 7 years specializing as a human intelligence or a HUMINT officer.
I'm not going to lie, Ben. Most people lead with the CIA. I'm just throwing that out there. Most people
I'd like to give people a little bit of background information. A little bit of context. Like, well, you're more than the CIA, right?
It's like another Pennsylvania guy. Oh my gosh, yeah. Fencing is lame. Yeah, most people kind of lead with CIA because then people forgive me for being from Pennsylvania.
Well, I just kind of wanted to lead in, Instead of, boom, here's a clandestine operative from the CIA. So you spent 7 years with the CIA.
Right.
You spent a lot of time in Asia. I know I can't ask you exactly where.
I can't tell you.
Picked
so
up
it's all good.
Some pretty sweet language skills, Mandarin, Thai, Japanese. And on the back of that, once you got out of the CIA, I don't want to talk about the little rollback, the cover rollback process, but you've started your own business, Everyday Spy, where you teach everyday espionage skills to people who want to learn them both online and in person. If you want to find out more about that, head on over to everydayspy.com. But you can also find Andrew on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube at Everyday Spy. And of course, you also host your own Everyday Espionage podcast, which is on iTunes, Spotify as well.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And I know it's everywhere because you've had to listen to it for the last 48 hours.
Cramming. And today, we're not going to talk about professions, we're not going to talk about careers. You're going to tell us where all the bodies are, who killed JFK, and what's in Area 51.
Exactly. What aliens really look like.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah. All those conspiracy theories that I know the truth about.
That's right. Well, I'm sure you've been asked about them a million times. You can't work at the CIA and not get those questions.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because you think that secrets live at CIA. And to a certain extent, that's true. Secrets do live at CIA. But they sure as hell didn't tell them to me. I was out there, they made me a secret. They didn't tell me secrets. That's the difference. Nobody gets that from the movies.
Yeah, and I'm sure the CIA and all those intel agencies are pretty compartmentalized. You know what you need to know, and that's all
it's
you
so
know.
Serious, yeah. And so compartmentalization is an interesting topic because one of the skills that I teach in Everyday Spy is I try to teach people the value of compartmentalization because the agency did a great job of teaching us how this works in a professional setting, right? So if you look at any business organization, and let's just say it's a medium-sized business, it's going to have multiple business functions: business development, marketing, human resources, accounting. There's no reason for anyone to have information that crosses all 4 of those verticals. If they do, then now you have a lack of control of information. Not to mention the fact that you have an overwhelming amount of information for whoever's trying to track all those details. But you don't want someone in accounting to understand your HR process. You don't want someone in business development to understand your marketing process. That's not how you want to work, because then you have a potential for insider threat, where now your HR process might get compromised and you won't be able to track it backwards because you'll be looking in the HR department for a leak that exists in the accounting department. So this was just so cool to see it play out in CIA, and then see how on the business side, everyday professionals don't even think that way. Instead, they try to encourage everybody to understand all the different business processes.
Well, I think too, from an individual perspective, you have to be able to compartmentalize, because, you might have a relationship breakdown, or you might have a death in the family, or you might have some stressor. As a professional, you need to be able to lock that down, go into work and do whatever it is you do and do it well. And I'm sure that's probably a big part of what your skill set brought to the table, as well as being able to emotionally put things in boxes and deal with what was right in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of compartmentalization is a little bit different, but you're right. That's individual inside your own head, compartmenting your emotional family life with your work life, with your own like levels of personal self-esteem or what you're trying to accomplish, right? But yeah, you see multiple levels of this compartmentalization. Have you ever seen the Netflix, I think it was a Netflix series, but the series about Sherlock Holmes that had, what's the guy's name with the crazy last name, the Brit?
Cumberbatch?
That's it, yes.
Yeah.
Benedict
Cumberbatch.
Is that right? Man, that's a name that just makes panties melt as far as I'm concerned.
The accent doesn't hurt.
He had this, in that show, they showed how he had this mind palace. I don't know if you got to see the show, but he would save and recall information. Yes.
Yeah, the Mentalist TV show talks about that too.
He would have this mind palace. That's very, very simple, or very similar to what we're taught. Only it's not, we don't look at it as a palace. We look at it as more of like almost like an old school library organization kind of drawer, the Dewey Decimal System, so to speak. But they do teach us how to take and retain and file away information in a visual way that we can recall it in the future, specifically because we have to...
And it's kind of like where you tell yourself a story, right?
Well, and you always have to remember who you really are. You can't forget that you are a CIA officer acting undercover. It's not like method acting where you dive into your character. You have to actually always remember who you are, and then also remember this detailed cover legend that you're trying to execute with.
Yeah, that's got to be tricky. That has got to be a
fraud.
Really difficult thing to be able to... Yeah, I guess
it's fraught with errors for sure. I have an exercise that I put people through. So some of my events, I bring people out and I run them through simulations. And one of the simulations I have is you get to spend a day as a field officer. And I have about a 50% like a 50% slip up rate when I teach them how to operate an alias. I give them an exercise where they defend their alias, and then I have them sign a sheet of paper that they have successfully completed their alias, and about 50% sign it in their real name. They forget to sign the piece of paper in their alias. That's one of the biggest slip-ups that we have in the field. Signing a receipt, signing some kind of document, signing a contract in your true name, and then the person on the other end is just confused, right? Mr. Smith, why did you sign this as Andrew Bustamante, or whatever the mistake might be?
I guess that's probably, it sounds like one of those things that it gets easier the longer you do it. So I'm guessing you probably have periods where you might be undercover for a week, which seems like a higher risk situation than someone going undercover for months at a time, where you kind of just live in that alias for a little while and you kind of get more acclimated to it. Is that fair?
Yeah, you're not incorrect. Yeah, you're not incorrect at all. There are certain things that are beneficial to being undercover for like 4 days, and then there's other things that are beneficial to being undercover for 4 months. But the mistakes, there's always pitfalls. It's just a matter of what the different pitfalls are. Staying under for something like 4 months can be tricky because if you have something that you haven't resolved, whatever it is, a mortgage payment, someone's, final bill, who knows what, right? Your car,
a late blockbuster
that you haven't
rental.
paid off. Yeah, whatever it might be. But those those things kind of creep up on you, and they have a strange way of finding you through your personal email address or through like some kind of social media when you're trying to be covert in a different place. And it's very inconvenient when it happens.
Has it made you obsessed about your own personal security in terms of email passwords, your own private personal social media? Has it affected the way that you think and treat those things?
It actually, I would say it's the other way around. Rather than being obsessed, I recognize how compromised my privacy is. I mean, God bless every American out there fighting for their privacy. If you want to do that with your time and your energy, I support you 1,000%, but you need to know you're going to lose that fight. There is nothing private in our world anymore. Yes, the government has laws that protect it from taking your privacy, but that doesn't exist in corporations. So if anything, what I've learned to do is just simplify. Just don't have that many email accounts. Don't have your notifications on your phone. Turn off your location functionality. Those kinds of things that are very inconvenient for everyday life, but actually secure.
That's interesting. I mean, it is like you say, it's everywhere. People can get whatever information they want, and it's not the government. It's the corporations, it's the Amazons, it's the Googles that people just use with a little bit less caution, I think, than they probably should.
Yeah, I was recently walking down a commercial street in Houston, and I was walking with a friend of mine who is staunchly freedom, Republican-leaning, privacy, like ultra-privacy kind of person. And we're walking down this commercial street, and they're preaching to me about how important privacy is and all the sadness and the frustration that comes from the government impeding on people's privacy and their Second Amendment and everything else. And then a notification pops up on their phone, and the notification is a buy one, get one coupon for an ice cream shop. And where is that ice cream shop? Immediately to the right of us on the commercial walkway that we're walking on. It's a geo-tagged notification that was able to identify that person's phone was within a certain distance of the ice cream shop and popped up a notification offer. And the guy was excited. It's like, oh, I just got to buy 2 for 1. It's like 3 p.m. Let's go get some ice cream. And I wanted to just kind of shake him a little bit, like the way that you're never supposed to shake a baby. I wanted to shake this adult the way you're never supposed to shake a baby. But there are some people that, it's not worth the energy to shake them.
Yeah, my brother and I, we got together one weekend and we were talking about this, and we decided to play a game. And randomly we would just mention a random country, and it was the same random country every week, every time it was mentioned throughout the course of the weekend. And then lo and behold, both of us start getting advertisements on our social media for airfares and this kind of thing. And it's there because you change the settings and you give these apps access to microphones. And, from an intelligence gathering perspective, that must open the floodgates for you guys trying to find people and then exploit them to give you information.
Yeah, what people getting information is not the challenge. That's what it sounds sexy to think that you're stealing information, getting secrets and collecting secrets. But that's not really the challenge. The challenge comes when you have oceans of information, terabytes of information, and then you have to put together just the important, relevant information and make something out of it that someone else can take action on. That's the major challenge. I loved being out in the field. I loved traveling the world. I loved collecting secrets that I wasn't supposed to know. But I wasn't the one at the end of the day saving the world, right? The people saving the world are the armies of analysts who have to go through all that all source data and make sense out of it, and then give it to a policymaker, some senator, some congressperson, who honestly doesn't have to have any credentials to be in their seat other than a majority of people voting for them in some random district of some random state. And then the analyst has to deliver this highly professional intelligence report with a specific action item that this otherwise everyday person understands and can take action on.
And I guess, too, just figuring out what is true in all of that data must be just a mountainous task. You get all these different data points, what's relevant, what's not, yeah.
Yeah, everybody plays a role in that process, a process that we call validation or vetting. Whether you're in the field, you have a way of validating the person or the source that you're collecting information from. And then there's multiple levels of validation, each with a different skill set. Analysts validate a certain way, operators validate a certain way, targeters validate a certain way. Even the final briefers, the people who are briefing the president on the president's daily brief, even they have a way of validating. So we try to cover each other's tracks and have triple and quadruple checks before we tell the president something that's wrong.
Yeah. One of the things I'd always heard about intelligence was that there was this really strict principle that what the CIA and the other agencies did was gather intelligence, and it's the politicians that make the policy. And that had always been kind of a sacrosanct principle. Is that something that you actually saw in practice, or did you see at times policy being interwoven with intelligence?
It's interesting. Professional intelligence officers are some of the most professional people I've ever seen. They do an excellent job of keeping their opinions out of policy. They sometimes veer into having political opinions, but they don't have policy opinions. Where things start to get sticky, man, is actually when policymakers start overreaching and getting involved in intelligence operations. And that happens more and more kind of each year. When all the torture was discovered in Guantanamo Bay, when the NSA was found collecting metadata on American citizens, those types of events are unfortunate events. They are events where the agency followed, the CIA, the NSA, followed the court system. They notified all the right people of what they were doing, and the secret court system designed to support the intelligence infrastructure supported and approved of those operational ideas, right? Now, in hindsight, the larger court dismissed or disagreed with what the secret courts concluded. So that's all fine. That's all history. That's all good to go. But the end result of that is now you have policymakers who want to involve themselves in operations. And you're kind of seeing that even now with the fight I lost it, man. But everybody's turning pressure on the new CIA director to start shaping operations around these policy objectives. And that's just as bad as shaping policy, having intelligence officers shape policy.
Do you think the intelligence agencies as a collective can ever get too big or too powerful? Like, I know historically JFK was concerned about the amount of power that had been centralized in the CIA. Do you think there's a place where the agencies get too much size, too much power, too much reach?
The way that they're organized currently, we're safe from that happening because they're broken into different branches. Some fall under the legislative branch, some fall under the executive branch, and then the funding is all separated. The authorities are all divided. So you have the situation where CIA doesn't have arrest authority on the continental United States. So no CIA officer can arrest an American citizen. FBI can arrest an American citizen, but FBI can't collect foreign intelligence in a foreign country, right? So that these are all authorities that help to protect against any one intelligence partner becoming too powerful. Now, all it takes to change that is a stroke of a pen, right? An executive order or a Senate Committee of Intelligence changing the authorities. So we're always kind of one pen stroke away from overreaching. But the way that we've been maturing and professionalizing our intelligence services makes me more confident that you're not going to see that big brother type of power ever again, at least not in modern America. Some post-apocalyptic America, maybe, but we're safe for now.
Let's take a step back. So I've heard you describe your time as a nuclear missiles officer as being pretty boring. You know, you're underground in a silo for 48, 72 hours at a time, and you were about to get out, and you decided that you were going to apply for the Peace Corps. What happened during that process of applying for the Peace Corps?
Yeah, so I am your stereotypical people pleaser, right? I was a high performer in high school because that's what my parents demanded. And then I went into the military because that's what my parents had done. So I'm chasing these expectations from other people. And I find myself, turning 26 years old and sitting underground as a nuclear missile officer for the U.S. Air Force, which is one of the only two tracks in the Air Force to make general, right? You can be a pilot or you can be a nuclear missile officer. Now, I was both. The Air Force Academy had slotted me for pilot training. I had gone through pilot training, cross-trained into space and missiles, and ended up in a nuclear missile silo or a nuclear missile launch control center, Launch Control Capsule, LCC. And I was doing well by Air Force standards according to the documentation. But man, life sucked. No 26-year-old male wants to be underground for 3 days at a time and then wants to emerge from this underground dark hovel smelling like brine and the salt water that they have to use down there to keep the equipment cool. Man, it was like a dating nightmare trying to get that stuff out of my hair and not smell like a hobo most of my non-active duty days. But yeah, so when I got out, really all that I could think about at 26 years old leaving the Air Force was, how do I live a life that is the total antithesis of this? And that's what made me think of the Peace Corps. Let me go to Africa. Let me help starving children. Let me teach them how to read English. Let me teach ladies how to knit baskets or weave baskets that they can sell. Let me find some nice, hairy armpitted, hairy-legged hippie chick who's going to strum the ukulele and sing me lullabies at night. That was my mission leaving the Air Force. And then when I submitted the application, submitting the application online, I was interrupted by one of those red screens of death that told me I might qualify for other opportunities. And when I saw the screen, I was a total sucker, like all 26-year-old boys are, that there might be something better. So sure, if the screen is telling me pause, wait 72 hours before I continue, I might have something better. Well, of course, I'm going to pause and hold my application for 72 hours. And that was when the agency reached out to me.
And I do want to talk to you in some detail, perhaps at another time, about the recruitment process and the training process. But I think your back-end career and your transition back into civilian life is as interesting, I think, in many ways. So you're getting towards the end of your stint with the agency. You've met your wife, and again, dating in the agency must be a tricky thing too, especially you're being sent to different places and all that kind of stuff. But as you come out, you can't just sign a document and then go out and be regular old Andrew again, right? Because you've had all these covers. So what did that transition out look like? Because it sounds like it was formative and really seeing how some of these skills that you acquired could be applied in the workforce and in professional America.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually leaving the military was a little bit of a disaster. And anybody out there who's a veteran or who served in the military knows what I'm talking about. The military transition process is immature and insufficient for equipping, service members to understand their value in the commercial context. When I left the agency, it was even worse, because now the agency has invested all of this time and knowledge and effort and money into turning you into an intelligence officer. The last thing they want is for you to leave. It's a vulnerability to their information. It's a strike against the CIA's ego. Why would anybody ever want to leave the CIA, right? So there's all these barriers in place that make it very hard to leave. And one of those barriers is that when you choose to voluntarily separate, you go into this 2-year cover rollback process that you're still forced to remain in your cover identity, but you lose all of your cover backstopping. So there's nothing to support your cover story anymore. And you're not allowed to say that you're with CIA. And then kind of like the triple crown, the trifecta of evil here is that somebody else has to write and approve your resume. So you get this resume that you don't even control, and it's a glowing resume up until the time you start with CIA. And then for some reason, it looks like you are just a lazy bum from that point forward. Too busy to talk about details. You have typos, all this garbage that goes wrong, and it's just unprofessional. So that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting all the other hardships, but when I left the agency and was given this resume that was just trash, that I couldn't even change. If I wanted to change a resume, I had to go through a publication review committee and get their approval, and half the time they would reject it just because it's already been approved once. So it made it very difficult to represent my true professional nature. It definitely made it difficult to represent my true skill set in the outside world.
So if your cover identity was Peter Pan, when you come out for those 2 years, your name continues to be Peter Pan until that 2-year window closes.
Yeah, it's the nice thing is you're not in alias. So you're not in an alias identity. You're still your true name. But let's say that my name's Andrew Bustamante. Let's say that my cover was that I was a printer repairman, right? So now I'm a printer repairman. A printer repairman who has been a printer repairman for the last 8 years, should know quite a bit about printers, right? They should know the engineering, the technology, the major industries that use printers, whatever else, you name it. And they would talk about that in their resume. I've worked with these big names. I've used these technologies. I've sold this many printers. I've worked with these specific operating systems that improve printers, whatever it might be. Instead, we have some, college or associate's degree level HR person at CIA who writes our resumes for us. And now it's like, I was a printer repairman. I liked being a printer repairman, and I hope to do it again. I would be a printer repairman for you. I'm like, how am I going to get hired with this garbage resume? I'm an Air Force Academy graduate, and now I love printers.
I love printers. I finally found my passion in life.
No one's going to
Xerox posters on your wall.
Yeah, so it was heartbreaking, man. I had a 1-year-old child and a wife who had also left CIA. So we were walking away from two $90,000 a year salaries in Washington, D.C. That's where we were in our career, $90,000 a year. So a dual household income of about $180K in a area that was way, way inflated. So our 180 combined didn't go very far. But now we're trying to find any job at all that would just accept our resume. And we're submitting stuff online, and we're submitting stuff in paper form, and we're calling friends to try to see who can get us an interview. And no one's taking us seriously because our first impression is that paper impression that doesn't look good. It doesn't pass through any of the bots that are looking for keywords. It doesn't pass muster with any entry-level HR person who's looking at your cover letter or looking at your resume. It just doesn't pan out. So we ended up having to abandon the whole process after about 4 months of going unemployed. And we said, we do have skills, and I wonder if those skills would work in the workplace. Specifically, we know how to engineer influence. We know how to create enough influence that we can shape other people's decisions. What if we applied that in the corporate work environment? Could that get us a job? And then it worked.
Yeah, and that's a thing that I think, because we live in a world with so much technology and social media, we don't have the natural opportunities to learn how to build fast rapport. I mean, small talk is an art to be done well. I mean, tell us about some of the skills that you developed in your CIA role, and then how you went about translating that into the services that you run now, but also how you implemented them.
Yeah. So one of the game changers for us when we started applying this stuff in the corporate world, and I still use it today with clients, with customers, with high net worth individuals that I'm trying to woo into some sort of client agreement. The first thing that the agency taught us is that you have to think through the eyes of your target. Everybody walks around living their life thinking they're the center of the story, right? It's my life. This is my movie, my story, and I am the star. I'm going to Starbucks. There's nothing else happening in the world right now except me going to Starbucks. There's nothing else in the world happening right now except the experience I'm having with my 2-year-old having a temper tantrum on the floor. It's hard for us to remember that actually every single human being is having their own experience in the exact same moment that you're having your experience. Right now, where I'm sitting in Tampa compared to where you're sitting right now, Ben, you're having a completely different experience, even while we're on the same podcast. So the agency first shapes us to understand how to stop thinking like we're the center of the story and start shifting to experience the story our target is living. Once you make that shift, something happens on a subconscious level with the target. They start feeling a sense of connection to you because they start feeling like, oh, this person gets me. This person gets it, right? You don't actually get it. You're just putting a little bit of effort into thinking like them instead of putting yourself as the most important person in the story. It's a simulated connection that's artificial, but it feels very genuine to the target.
So I know that you're a big fan of the Myers-Briggs personality type. Is that one of the tools that you use where you're immediately meeting somebody and sizing them up and getting a sense of what they know, how they work, and how you can exploit them to benefit your mission as a CIA agent or as a employee, business person, whatever the case may be.
Yes. So I would change that statement a little bit. I wouldn't say it's something we immediately use because it takes time. It takes time to assess. Assessment is something we do immediately use, but it takes time to assess an individual's behavior, word choice, mannerisms, responsiveness. It takes time to assess all of those factors to then land on a reasonable Myers-Briggs estimate. So it's easy to immediately sit down from someone like you, right? And I'm like, Ben's wearing glasses. Ben has a bald head, whether it's shaved because it has a strange pattern or whether it's actually just bald and nothing grows there. I don't know, but his beard is groomed. He's wearing a button-down collar. It's open on 2 buttons, so the guy's not too uptight. But we start to make all of these assessments. I see the equipment that you're using is really nice. I can tell that you're trying to run a professional podcast. That gives me the opportunity to make some initial assessments about you that I can test over time. And then as I test those assessments, then I start to hone in on a Myers-Briggs type indicator pattern that might accurately represent who you are.
So help our listeners. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard about the Myers-Briggs, but can you give us kind of an overview of what it is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll do it from an operational point of view, not an academic point of view.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, you'll find all sorts of academic stuff online about personality testing and Myers-Briggs and how it applies to you. I would throw all that crap out the garbage. It's all garbage. I would throw it all out. It doesn't matter your personality. What matters is if you can assess someone else's personality. So Myers-Briggs it's a measure of your core reactive instinctual personality, which is why it doesn't change over time. And I strongly believe it doesn't change over time. It can, you can force changes, but when you're actually tapped and your resource depleted and your instinct is all that's taking over, your core 4 indicators are all sound. Those instinctual indicators break into 16 different combinations, but they're essentially just measuring how you get your energy. Do you get your energy as an extrovert or an introvert? They're measuring how do you engage with information. Do you engage with information from your 5 senses, or do you intuit information? Do you kind of get a sense of the truth from the information you're hearing instead of measuring the truth? And then how you make your decisions. Do you make your decisions based on gut instinct? That's your feelers. Or do you make your decisions based off of logical thinking? That's your thinkers. And then the 4th question that it kind of answers is how do you engage with the world around you? Do you engage with the world through processes and systems? If so, then you're a judger. Or do you engage with the world through a sense of relationships and engagement levels? That's a perceiver. So you get for each question basically has 2 options, E or I, extrovert or introvert, intuitor or sensor, N or S, thinker or feeler, T or F, and then judger or perceiver, J or P. And there's 16 combinations, and at the end of it, you understand what you are, how you engage with information, how you make decisions, how you engage with the world around you, where you get your energy. But more importantly, if you know how someone else answers, or you can answer those questions for someone else, then you can orchestrate an environment around them that basically makes it so that you're controlling their decisions, their energy levels, their thought processes, and how they feel the world engages with them. And that's a super powerful operational advantage.
Yeah, so it's a tool to interpret the people that you're engaging with rather than being this inward-looking tool to understand yourself, is how you would apply it operationally.
Thank you for putting it that way, yes. And not only that, but it's a tool to understand that person at a core level, not at a core personality, raw, instinctual level, not some fabricated academic level.
So here's a question for you. I mean, you strike me as a pretty outgoing person. You've done a lot of public speaking. You've traveled the world. You've had to live super independently. You've been in a lot of high-stress situations. So meeting someone for the first time and building fast rapport, that's old hat for you. You've done so much of it through the course of your career. It's second nature. What if I'm someone who is introverted, who does get socially anxious, who might be feeling like, I don't even know if I can handle this job? How do you move through some of those self-imposed hindrances to be able to apply what you've told us about assessing the people around you?
That's a good question. So the first thing I would say is understand that any feelings that you have about yourself are subjective in nature, meaning they're not real. They're just how you feel. There's a subjective reality and there's an objective reality. If a quiet, introverted person sits in a room and feels awkward and limited and claustrophobic and anxious, nobody else sitting in the room looking at that person thinks those things about that person. It's just their own story in their own head. If you can get out of your head and look at yourself through the eyes of everybody else in the coffee shop, they're just looking at some guy sitting in the corner in a blue shirt or whatever, right? So that's important because you understand you are always the one in control. Even if you feel like you have no control, you're wrong. Objectively speaking, you speak when you choose to speak. And when you speak, if you're trying to get into the small talk, trying to break through the barrier of having a social conversation, never be afraid to ask questions. Don't wait for someone else to ask you a question. Instead, be the person who asks the question, because the person who's asking questions is the person in control of a conversation. If you let someone else ask you a question, you're going to respond to their question. Then they're going to ask another one, and you're going to respond again. And before you know it, they're prying into stuff that you don't want to talk about because you've given control to them. Instead, you ask the questions, you steer the conversation. And especially if you're the kind of person who's socially anxious about exposing too much of your own personal life, you should be asking questions all the time, because the last thing anyone answering questions suspects is that the person asking them questions is just interrogating them. The subconscious human mind loves the attention that comes from someone else asking you questions.
It's the ego. You know,
It's
can,
the ego.
It sounds like you can really use someone's ego to get a ton of information that can be helpful in the field as a human intelligence agent, but also as an associate in an accounting firm, or, you know, you can build rapport with that person by kind of stroking their ego a little bit.
And it's not even necessarily, I mean, ego stroking is a very simplified way of looking at it. What you're doing is you're asking questions, and if you use open-ended questions are questions that don't have a yes or no answer. They don't have a binary answer. Yes, no, on, off, left, right. Those are all binary answers. If you ask questions that are open-ended, how do you feel? How did you like that movie? What are your thoughts on Turkey right now? You'll be shocked at the stuff that comes out of people's mouths and how much you can learn about them if you just ask one question, one open-ended question, and then you let them talk.
How do you stop from being the person who just asks questions and they kind of say, I feel like you've just asked me questions for the last 45 minutes. Tell me something about you. And some people naturally are a little bit more guarded and they're like, I'm not going to tell you too much personal information because I don't know you yet. How do you kind of break through that? How do you decide when to give them a little of yourself in order to kind of continue that process of questioning?
So that consideration in and of itself, Ben, is an indicator that you're mildly introverted because you're already afraid of what someone else is going to think, right? So that's showing a little bit of your inner feeler instead of your inner thinker. And it's showing a little bit that you're not excited to engage people because it doesn't bring you energy. It's going to cost energy to sit with people. So even just that concern. So I want to share something called the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule means that 80% of one thing basically represents 20% of something else. So 80% of your customers are only 20% of your revenue. 20% of your customers are 80% of your revenue. 20% of your problems are caused by 80% of your processes. 80% of your processes, cause 20% of your problems, that kind of thing. When in this example specifically related to how do you ask questions, the 80-20 rule again applies. Of the 100 people that you're going to talk to, 80% of them will never suspect a thing if you just ask questions. The vast majority are going to love it. They're going to love the fact that you ask questions. They're going to sit there and feel like there's a connection. They're going to feel like you're a good listener. You don't cut them off. You don't interrupt them. I like being around Ben. Ben listens to me. That's how they're going to think and feel. Only 20% are going to think, oh man, I have been talking about myself this whole time. I haven't asked you any questions. What's wrong with me? I'm so rude, right? And even then, that 20% isn't accusing you of interrogating them. But if you want a recipe for how you get past that, I always tell people, ask 2 questions, follow up on the third. So, what are your thoughts on Turkey right now? Why do you think that the president should step down? And then instead of asking a question the third time, the third thing you say is in response to their answer. Oh yeah, I totally agree with what you're thinking. I had this experience the other day when I was reading this in the newspaper, right? So question, follow up. And then chances are they're going to respond to your follow-up with more information. And now you get to ask a question again.
So that's, first of all, that's super helpful. But we're also, I guess, talking about a fairly neutral situation, okay, in the sense that you don't have any preconceived ideas about me. I'm engaging with you fairly early on in our relationship. How does that model change when you're at a social deficit? So, for example, let's say your company that you're representing has a really difficult client that is really unhappy with you, and you're going into that situation for the first time with that particular client. Does that model change when you're at a social deficit as opposed to being neutral?
I love the term social deficit. It ties directly back to something that I teach about something known as social capital, meaning, social wasta, social rapport is just like currency. It's just like actual capital. You can save it, you can keep it, you can grow it, you can spend it, which means you can also be at a deficit. So to get to your question, if you're going into something where you're already at a social deficit, the client is unhappy, the HR person doesn't really want to be meeting with you, that you're a low qualified candidate, whatever it might be, right? When you go into that, that's the ultimate time to understand that personal relationship trumps certifications, it trumps academic background, it trumps professional performance. There is nothing stronger than human connection and human relationships. And if you disagree with me, you're welcome to disagree with me, but I'm telling you that you're wrong. The world revolves on human relationships. People buy from the person they like, not the person with the best product. People hire the person they like. They don't hire the most qualified person. People marry the person they love. They don't marry the person who's the best fit, who makes them feel good all the time, right? So human relationships, human connections rule. So if you're going into a social deficit, you've got to use questions to build a connection with your target, because the chances are you're at that deficit because that person does not feel connected to you. They feel like you're wasting their money. They feel like you're wasting their time. They feel like you don't understand their objectives. You don't understand their goals. You don't understand their priorities. If you roll into that and you start with, I feel like there might be a gap between what you're trying to achieve and what I'm trying to work on. Can you give me a sense of whether you agree with that or not? Right away, that person's thinking, this person gets me. He knows I'm unhappy, or she knows I'm unhappy. Now's my chance to unleash, right? I don't think that you're doing your job right. I don't think you're listening to my whatever. And then once you go right back to that same process, right? Confirm. I agree. I had not heard this before. I had not known of this before. I'm sure you mentioned it and I overlooked it because I was so focused on, the operational nuances of supporting you. What if I did this? Do you think this would be better or worse, right? You validate that person's concerns, you build a human connection, and that client is going to suddenly see your social deficit is going to turn into a social surplus.
What if you're in a situation where that deficit is brought about by you? Let's say you've screwed up at work. You've made a mistake that has cost the client, cost the business. How do you build that relationship back when you really have created a situation that's historical, it's gone on for a little while, you've created a significant problem, and asking questions of your boss may not really deal with the fact that there's a performance issue and I'm really trying to think of reasons that you should be still here. How if you're in that situation, how would you use these tools?
You may not like the answer, but it's kind of the same way. If you know that you're the problem, you need to own that. There's incredible social capital that's grown when you own your mistake. Because the person sitting across from you, just think, Ben, I don't know if you're a parent. Nobody who makes a mistake, that 80-20 rule, 80% of people who make a mistake are going to roll in and blame it on someone else. So the person sitting on the opposite side of you already expects that the probabilities are you're going to walk in and blame the problem on somebody else. So right away, you blow their expectations out of the water and you say, hey, I screwed up. I did the wrong thing. I cost us $120,000, right? My lack of action resulted in us losing this client. You own it right away. That throws them off their game and builds a social connection immediately. Nobody wants to say, I'm glad that you understand your mistake, you're fired. What they want to say is, you're an idiot, you don't even know what you're doing, you're fired. Once you admit to that, you know your mistake, they don't feel like they can follow through on their original plan. Now they want to hear more. How are you going to fix it? What are you going to do next? If you know you made that mistake, why did you let it happen? So you control the narrative, you control the conversation. And if you're really confident in your skills, then you start taking massive risks to win back their trust, because that's what you've lost. You've lost their trust in your capability. You haven't lost their trust in you as a person. You've just lost their faith that you can operate at a specific capacity. So if you're willing to say, don't pay me this month, let me work for free and build this back, and if you still think I'm not worth being here in 30 days, let me go. Like, put your money where your mouth is. Show your confidence. Throw them so far off of what they were expecting, they have no option but to agree with you. Because guess who's in control of that conversation? Not them.
Yeah. It's almost reminds me of a couple of things. It reminds me of that movie 8 Mile, where Eminem is in a rap battle and he goes first, and instead of trying to deflect, he basically owns all of the things that this guy is going to name call and attack. And so when his opponent gets up to rhyme back at him, he's got nothing because he's already owned all the things that he would have claimed. He just sits there, he's got nothing to say. There's a book that I recommend to all the people I work with called Extreme Ownership by a guy called Jocko Willink, who's a Navy SEAL. And that's that idea of he does a great TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, folks, look it up on YouTube, Jocko Willink TED Talk. And he talks about how a mission goes badly wrong. And he was preparing this debrief, and initially it was like, hey, you did this is all went wrong. And he talked about how he just had this feeling inside that was like, this is not right. And so he goes in and he takes total blame. I'm in control. I made a mistake. And he kept his job. And he basically, in the TED Talk, talks about how had he not done that, he would have been fired. And it's that thing that kind of feels scary, but it's what you should be doing.
So let me give you a kind of a real world example from my own business, right? When I'm not dealing with clients, when I'm not dealing with people one-on-one, and a lot of my business is digital, how does a digital entrepreneur, or how does any entrepreneur, show the same kind of ownership when they only get one chance? You only get one chance to sell a customer a cake. You only get one chance to sell them a pair of shoes. If they don't like the cake, they don't like the shoes, they're never coming back, right? You never get that second conversation. You never get to hear that they're disappointed. So how do you show that extreme ownership? I have found nothing better than showing your extreme ownership by offering a guarantee that sounds just impossibly good, right? Everybody expects 100% money back guarantee. So I buy a pair of shoes. If you're not happy with your shoes, bring them back in 2 weeks and get a new pair of shoes. 100% money back guarantee. We've seen that so much, it doesn't make any difference. We don't believe that. We're like, well, no shit. I can just cancel the charge on my card and get a 100% guarantee and keep the shoes, right?
Yeah.
So what I've done in my business and what I encourage everybody to do is find a creative way to make your guarantee something that causes people to stop. Everything I sell, every live event, every digital product, every book, every lecture, everything I sell, I give people a guarantee that says, I am so confident that you are going to grow from what I'm teaching you, that if for any reason you're not happy, I will give you your money back and still let you keep the product itself, whether it's a $5,000 product or a $5 product. And it doesn't matter much when people buy my $12 ebook. But when people come out here to spend $3,000 learning how to run professional intelligence surveillance operations with me, and I tell them, if you're not blown away, if you're not totally confident in your skills at the end of 2.5 days, I am going to put $3,000 right back in your hand, and you're going to get on a plane and go home. That makes a ton of difference for all of my high-end products. And I've never had a return on a high-end product, and my overall return rate is less than 2% because people try my stuff, they love it, and even if they don't love it, they know that they'll get more than their money back if they don't. That's extreme ownership at the entrepreneurial level.
That probably leads us into a really good direction to go. So we've talked a lot about how do you build this fast rapport, how do you build relationships, this social capital.
Social capital.
How and when do you cash that in? So I'm imagining your role is all about building relationships and then turning the screws to get information from people for the benefit of whatever your mission might be. But you don't necessarily want to burn every single person that you've got, because you might want to go back to them over quite a period to get that information. From a civilian perspective, how and when do you turn the screws, and how tightly, and how do you go about doing it so that you start to get the benefit or the dividend of that social capital?
It's the opposite of what you probably think. Most people think you invest, and you withdraw rarely. Instead, I would say it's the opposite. You try to get your money back. You try to get you use your social capital frequently and quickly, because what you're really looking for in a meaningful relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a romantic relationship or an intelligence relationship, what you're really looking for is reciprocation. If you're dealing with somebody who won't reciprocate, you don't want to spend a bunch of time building social capital with them, because you're building social capital in a different currency than the currency they're accepting. It's like bringing a bunch of dinar or dirham from UAE and trying to spend it in Mexico, where they're looking for a different currency. You don't want to do that. You want to be exchanging social currency or social capital in the same currency. The only way you can do that is by frequently exchanging it. There's another great example here. Currency devalues over time. The $10 from 10 years ago isn't worth the same amount as $10 right now. So the social capital you built 10 years ago isn't worth the same influence right now. So that's just another reason why you want to build it and spend it, build it and spend it, build it and spend it, right? I'm on your podcast. This is the perfect time for me to, even if I was on this podcast with you right now and I challenged you live on the podcast to connect me to, 2 other attorneys that you think would be interested in my content, you would feel the pressure to say, yeah, absolutely. I got 2 guys that jump to mind right away. For me, that's 2 potential affluent, high income earning clients that if you say yes, that's proof to me that we're exchanging social capital in the same currency. If I ask you for help and you say no, that's proof to me that there's no reason for me to keep investing my own social capital. It's not the same currency.
But if I give you the names of 2 possible referrals, it doesn't really cost me much, right? But if I'm in another country where me giving you something could result in me or my family being killed or detained or whatever, there's a higher cost there. So in your context, how do you withdraw from that social capital when the stakes are high?
You don't, yeah. So referrals, right? I think this is a great example, a great question. The example that we just had when I asked you for 2 referrals, like you said, don't cost you anything. In reality, a referral from you is quite a high value. It saves me tons of marketing. It saves me tons of time and effort, right? You see it as a small thing. I see it as something sizable and significant. So let's take that into the field with CIA trying to collect intelligence against something that's happening in the Republic of Congo, right? You wouldn't ask somebody in their first meeting, like our first meeting, you wouldn't ask them for the names and phone numbers of the president and vice president of the country. You would ask them for, can you recommend the best, safest dinner place? I'm looking for French food. What's the best French food in the area, right? And if they come back and they're like, oh, I don't know a whole lot about French food, or maybe they come back and they tell you the exact restaurant, right? Either way, they're trying to be of service to you. That's what you're looking for. That's the reciprocation you're looking for. And if they'll reciprocate on French food, then you take the relationship to the next level, right? Let's keep meeting. In fact, do you want to come with me to that French restaurant? I don't really have many friends here right now. You seem really cool. I'll treat you to dinner if you'll come with me. And now you get 2 hours of one-on-one time to explore their family, their connections, their relationships. How are they feeling living in Kinshasa? Are they planning on leaving Kinshasa anytime soon? And then once again, all that social capital, you can call on it, right? Hey, I've got 3 tickets to a race next week. I'm happy to give you one of the tickets and give one of your friends a ticket if you think they want to come. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to give the ticket to somebody at the door. Oh no, I've got the guy I was just telling you about? Let me see if he wants to come to the race with us. And now your network is growing and you have a new target to put more social capital into.
I think too, and this touches on a point that I think is worth referring to in the context of networking, just in a civilian perspective, and please jump in if I'm wrong, but if you want to get a job at Nike, you don't have to go and find the CEO of Nike and get a coffee meeting. But you're actually better off going a little bit further down the food chain and building relationships with people who can then introduce you to those people through that existing network. Is that fair? Is that a tool that you used as well? Rather than just going straight for the big fish, you try and build relationships with people around the big fish?
Yeah, that's another great point. Just to kind of tighten the target a little bit better, you don't go for people who are around the big fish. You go for decision makers that are stakeholders in the outcome, right? So a stakeholder might be a middle manager or a low-level manager or a supervisor, right? That person has a stake in the success of their department. An employee isn't really a stakeholder. They're there for a paycheck, and they're hoping that after a full year's work, they might get a bonus or a raise. They're not a stakeholder. Any employee out there who feels like they're a stakeholder, you're actually just a aspiring manager. You're trying to grow in your company, which is not the same thing as being a stakeholder. You don't have the decision-making power yet. So what you want to do when you're trying to network is two things. You never network by selling yourself. That's amateur hour. All the garbage
and
business,
people see it.
Yeah. All those business network BNI, I know you're huge. Anybody who's spending whatever it is, $70 a month or whatever to be part of BNI, I hope you're getting the referrals that give you more money back. You're making a third of what you could be making if you stopped wasting your time with BNI. But when the most important thing in networking is to demonstrate that you have something that you can deliver to someone else that brings them value. How do you fix one of their problems? Give them something that's lacking from their business or their life. How do you serve them? And how do you serve them without a charge, without a cost to them at first, right? Taking someone out to coffee is not that much of an expense, but it might make all the difference to them because now they feel like they have someone they trust. They have someone who connects with them, somebody who understands them. So when you network, you offer value, and then you network with people who are stakeholders, because a stakeholder will always see an upside for themselves by connecting you with others. If they don't see an upside for themselves, they're not going to connect you with anyone. They're just going to see you as a way to kill time. But if they're like, oh, Ben's a smart guy, and my manager's a smart guy, and I would love to introduce Ben to my manager because my manager is going to remember that I'm the guy that introduced this smart guy to him. You have to give people an upside in the networking relationship if you want them to take action.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think too, it's helpful. You mentioned earlier on the importance of asking questions and open-ended questions. And from my own experience, I found it really helpful if I talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, I've got 2 young boys and the eldest one plays rugby. That person that I might have interacted with may not remember me the next day. You know, who's Ben? I don't know who he is. But if I reach out and say, hey, John, it was great to meet with you. I hope little Johnny's season goes well. Or I saw the club results and I saw that little Johnny's team had a win. I hope he enjoyed the weekend. Even if he can't remember me, the fact that I know something about him, I found made him think, oh gosh, like I'm supposed to know this guy a little bit more than I can remember. I'm not going to think too hard about who he is. I'm just going to help him because we've obviously got some kind of interaction in the past and he knows something personal about me.
And you're 1,000% right. The only thing I would say is a little bit different is they will remember you. They will remember you because they are not remembering the 100 other people who talk about themselves. When you talk about someone's child, when you remember their name or their child's interest or their child's health issue or whatever, that person remembers your name. And they classify you in a different part of their brain than all the people out there asking them for something. Because now you're offering them a reminder of something they're very proud of in their life. And they don't get that during the workday. They get 100 emails asking them for something, and then they get 1 email from you reminding them that someone else is proud of their son. And they remember you for that.
Andrew, this has been super helpful. I feel like we could do an episode for several more hours talking about your career, the recruitment process, what you're doing with Everyday Spy, and there's a lot more that I know you could share with us when it comes to getting what you want at work and navigating interpersonal relationships in that context. But I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for joining us on The Professionists. One last question before we leave. And it's a question I ask everybody in every single interview of the podcast. And it really revolves around, what do you see as the future in your industry? So let's talk about intelligence from the government perspective. Where do you see it in 10 to 15 years? Do you see analysts being replaced by AI and algorithms? Do you see the human dynamic changing and it being more digital, open source type intelligence? What do you see happening in that field in the next 10 to 15 years?
I see the intelligence world exploding. It's going to become so powerful. And I know you're asking about government intelligence. And yes, CIA and NSA will always hire. There will always be new money. There will always be more budget. There's always going to be a need for military intelligence analysts and operators. But the place where it's going to exponentially explode is in private intelligence, because the world is waking up to the fact that the way to stop crime, the way to protect intellectual property, the way to maintain the security of your company and your investment isn't by reacting after somebody hacks you or reacting after somebody steals from you. The solution comes in having advanced warning, which is only found when you have private intelligence. Getting ahead of a problem, solving a problem before it's a problem, is the definition of intelligence. Everything else is just security or investigations or law enforcement. So as you see more AI, more intellectual property, more big business, the consolidation of major industries into a few key players, all of a sudden the demand for private intelligence and private intelligence skills is just going to go through the roof. And you're going to see more government people leave government to work for the commercial industry like me. You're going to see more people teaching intelligence skills so that young aspiring professionals can learn them. And that's exactly what Everyday Spy is there to do.
Fantastic. If you want to find out more, head on over to www.everydayspy.com, or you can follow Andrew at Everyday Spy on all of your usual social media. I know you're pretty active on Instagram. And go ahead and check out the Everyday Espionage podcast. In the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Professionists podcast. We're at the Professionists on Instagram. And if you've got questions or you've got a career in mind that you'd like us to explore in the future, head on over to www.theprofessionists.com, or you can just email us or direct message us through our social media. All the details in the show notes. And until next time, thanks again for joining us.